Welcome to our Zoom lessons on the story of Jesus. My name is Jamie Knapp, and in this lesson, we will focus on the wilderness. Let's share the screen so we can get to the PowerPoint slides. The ministry of John the Baptist is one of the first things that is described in all four of the Gospels: Matthew chapter 3, Mark chapter 1, Luke chapter 3, and John chapter 1. The word wilderness is included in each account: verse 3 of Matthew chapter 3, verse 3 of Mark 1, verse 4 of Luke 3, and verse 23 of John 1. And the reason why wilderness is included is because each of the gospel writers is referring to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, which says, "A voice is calling, clear the way of the Lord in the wilderness." So the purpose of John the Baptist was to prepare the people for the arrival of the Messiah. And according to Isaiah, John's ministry was going to occur in the wilderness. Well, the Gospel of John provides more details. And by the way, John the Baptist and John, who wrote the Gospel of John, not the same person. But in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 28, John tells us that this ministry was going to occur beyond the Jordan River, past Bethany, beyond the Jordan River. So at this point, it would be useful for us to share a different screen. And let's take a look at a picture of a map. And we've seen this map in a previous lesson: different regions: Judea, Samaria, Decapolis, Perea, Galilee, etc. But here's the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea. Now, for us, we're most interested in this area in Judea. Here's Jerusalem, there's Bethlehem, and here's Bethany. So Bethany, Jordan River, John was going to be out in this area. And you might recall from an earlier lesson, we talked about the Central Mountains, which came down through this part of Judea. Well, once you got past the Central Mountains, you entered the Jordan River Valley. And it's in this area where there was wilderness. And so John, not focusing his efforts and his ministry in Jerusalem, had come out to this more remote area, which is where he was going to have his ministry, and the people were going to have to come out to him. So let's switch back to the PowerPoint. So there were people who were traveling, in fact, many people who were traveling from Jerusalem, from Judea, from the other provinces. They were looking for John. They found him in the wilderness. Some came to be baptized. Some came simply because they were curious. They wanted to know what all the noise was about. This John the Baptist fellow who lives out in the wilderness, and he eats locusts and wild honey for his diet. He wears clothes made out of camel hair, and he has a leather belt around his waist. He was a curiosity for sure, but he also had a very important message, and people were interested in hearing that message. Jesus himself traveled from Galilee because he also wanted to hear John teach, but he wanted John to baptize him as well. John objected to this. He did not want to be the one who baptized Jesus. He wasn't objecting to Jesus being baptized, but he didn't think he was the one who should baptize Jesus. He thought Jesus should baptize him. But Jesus prevailed over John, and so John baptized Jesus, and as Jesus came out of the water, he then received the Holy Spirit. This marks the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. And Luke chapter 3, verse 23 tells us that Jesus was about 30 years of age when this happened. Now, sometimes when people begin their ministry, they have a potluck dinner at the church where they're going to be the minister, or maybe it gets announced in the Christian Chronicle that so-and-so is beginning a new ministry. Well, Jesus began his new ministry by being led into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit. And when we say the wilderness, well, John was already in the wilderness. Jesus was led deeper into the wilderness, into a more extreme or a more desolate part of the wilderness. And he fasted for 40 days. And then Satan came to tempt him. And the first temptation Satan put in front of him was food. Change these stones to food. And then Satan tempted him with power. And he tempted Jesus in a way of wanting to try to get Jesus' allegiance to be to him, to Satan. Well, Jesus did not fall for any of the temptations of Satan. And following his temptation, then Jesus came back into the area where John the Baptist was. He didn't immediately return to Galilee. But when he heard that John had been arrested, then Matthew chapter 4 and Mark chapter 1 tell us that Jesus withdrew to Galilee, which means he went back into the province of Galilee where he was from. Now, if we could have a quick sidebar at this point, I want to ask ourselves, who arrested John and why? And we had touched on this in an earlier lesson when we focused on Herod and Herod's different sons. Well, John the Baptist was arrested by Herod Antipas. And Herod Antipas was the tetrarch, the ruler of Galilee and Perea. And the reason why Herod Antipas arrested John was because John objected to the fact that Herod Antipas had married Herod Antipas' wife, whose name was Herodias. And John was saying in public, and he was quite vocal about this, that what Herod Antipas has done is wrong. Matthew chapter 14, Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 3. And so primarily as a way just to keep John quiet and to get that out of the general public, he arrested John, put him in prison. Later, it's the same Herod Antipas, who would have John the Baptist beheaded. Well, on returning to Galilee, Jesus initially went to the town of Capernaum. After that, he went to his hometown of Nazareth. We're told that in Luke chapter 4, verse 23. And let's just say that things did not go well in Nazareth. Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath. That was his practice. That's what he did on the Sabbath. He went to the synagogue. He got up to read, and the attendant handed him a scroll of the book of Isaiah. And Jesus read from Isaiah chapter 61. And here's what he read. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners, and to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord, the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting. So they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. After reading this, Jesus handed the scroll back to the attendant, and he sat down. And all the eyes of the people were upon him. And then Jesus made this statement. Isaiah was talking about me. And those in attendance found his statement to be quite puzzling because they knew him. Remember, this is the synagogue where he was educated as a young boy. This is the synagogue that he was an active participant in for the better part of 2 decades. And now he's saying, Isaiah is writing about me being the Messiah. And then Jesus added that the message he was going to deliver, he being Jesus, his message of salvation was going to be for everyone, not just for Jewish individuals. Well, with that, they ran him out of the synagogue. And they kept running him out across town, and they ran him to a cliff with the intention of just pushing him off the cliff. Jesus turned, walked through them, and simply walked away. But it was very clear at that point that Jesus' ministry was officially underway. And that's where this lesson will end. But in our next lesson, we will talk about base camp. I hope you can join us.